for the caring community of Taunton. 97.3 Apple FM.
Today's going to be quite an unusual day. I've spent the whole of the last year talking to people and to organisations and to finding out all about them. And somebody suggested, why don't we turn the tables? Yes, what a good idea. And I'm delighted to say that I've got Michaela Phimister alongside me, who's going to ask me whatever questions come into her head. They can be about anything at all. So I really haven't a clue what's going on at the moment. So, Michaela, I think it's probably over to you.
Yes, it was my idea to turn the tables. I thought we spend so much time talking about amazing people in our community when all the time we have an absolute gem sat right here every week. And he's an amazing chap with an amazing life story. And I thought it was about time we all heard about it. What do you think, guys? I think you want to know more about our fabulous Philip Knighton. He is currently our director. But he's had quite a long time in the radio industry. But it wasn't always like that, was it, Philip? We want to go right back. We want to find out all about you. So I'm going to do kind of like, this is your lifestyle, and take you right back. You take us right back to the beginning. I believe you were born in, let me just check my dates here, 1948. We're giving it all away now, aren't we?
1948 it was indeed. And yes, of course, when you think about it, it's remarkable really. I mean, the Second World War had only just finished. And therefore I go back almost to the edges of that, just by a couple of years. And it is remarkable. I was born in Taunton.
Yes.
So I am a Tauntonian.
You are indeed. And were you a home birth or were you a hospital birth?
No, well, you'll have to forgive me for this one because I don't remember an awful lot about it.
And why not?
But I think that I was born in a nursing home on the corner of Priory Avenue. Ah. Don't know why, don't know how. And I have a feeling as well that Mum had a rough time. Yeah. And that she was either in hospital or being cared for some time afterwards. So I first appeared not far off the cricket ground and definitely within the sight of St Mary's and St James's. The sound of St Mary's and St James's bells. So I have a sneaking feeling that I really qualify as a Tauntonian.
I think you're probably about as local as it gets, aren't you?
I reckon so, yes. It's a bit like Blackpool Rock, isn't it? I've probably got Taunton all the way through me.
We're trying to cut you in half to find out.
No, I really wouldn't go that far.
And were you one of many others, or were you the only?
No, I was the second child. I've got a sister called Eileen, who is about 18 months older than I am. She currently lives near Bampton. And, well, yes, she's a remarkable person as well in many ways. And I do think we're conventional. I think we can safely say that. But, of course, you never know how you're going to turn out, do you?
Absolutely. But tell us, how was home life? What were Mum and Dad like? What did they do? It might have been a special environment for you both to have turned out to be quite remarkable as you are.
I think the key factor to the environment is it was a loving and caring environment. Mm. And I think no matter who you are or where you are, if you've got that, then you've got the most solid basis for wherever you move on to from there. I think we were, first of all, in Salisbury Street, because my grandmother, my mum's mum, lived just round the corner in Greenway Crescent. They bought a house there when they were built, so that would be about 1930. And I think my parents moved into Salisbury Street. I'm not sure whether it was before I was born or afterwards. I couldn't tell you that because, as I say, my memory is not that good at that time.
Good, but not that good.
Good, but not that good, no. But I do remember all Salisbury Street, so I reckon I was there till I was about 3, maybe a little bit older.
Yeah.
But things, I remember our neighbours, I remember they turned into our aunties and uncles, looked after us when people had to go working or were otherwise engaged. My granny was around the corner, and that was great. They were a fabulous family. And I think the wonderful thing about them is, of course, they bought this house in 1930. Mm. And when you think about it, that was the height of Art Deco.
Yes.
And I never really thought about this until many years afterwards. And their entire house was furnished with Deco carpets, Deco three-piece suites, Clarice Cliff in the kitchen.
Ducks flying up the wall?
Ducks flying up the wall. But all this sort of trivial Deco stuff was there. And therefore, it never struck me for years, but they were trendy. Mm. So my grandparents were trendy.
I know, it's funny because as we grow up and they don't change their fashions, we kind of think, oh gosh, aren't they old-fashioned? But you forget that when they did it fresh, it was the height of fashion, wasn't it?
Well, exactly. By the time I first seen it when I was a youngish child, I'd forgotten that, I wouldn't have known about Art Deco. I wouldn't have known about Clariscliffe. But looking back now from the wizened old age that I am, I realise that my grandparents are really with it. My granddad, I think he was in charge of the menswear department in a shop in Taunton called William Brake's, which I think is where Peacock's was in town. And I've got some lovely photographs in the album of him with his tape measure round his neck, standing proudly in the middle of the department. And the thing that I remember about that shop is that they had a cash system like an overhead railway.
Oh.
And it was all to prevent theft and fraud and all the rest of it. So you'd pay for whatever you bought. It would be dropped in this little cup, and a lady who was about 195 would sit in a signal box and pull a lever. And it would go up to her, and it would be counted, and then the change would be given, and the receipt would be issued. And I love that, and I do wonder if my passion for railways came from that. Anyhow.
Yes, indeed. And so you moved on from Salisbury Street onto Roman Road, I believe.
Yeah, I before we go to Roman Road, I'd just like to mention my nan, who lived around the corner. She was brilliant. I don't think she worked at the time, but they were wonderful grandparents. You'd sit in the kitchen and they'd create things. And before you knew where you were, a sort of a plate of Welsh cakes had come off the stove.
Oh, lovely.
Or a plate of rissoles. I loved my grandfather's rissoles. They were gorgeous. So, going back to what I said before, it was a happy, caring, loving childhood. And I think, when you look around in the world, that is an incredibly wonderful and valuable thing to have.
And indeed a rare thing, I think, especially to have your grandparents nearby. I think that's becoming less and less the case now. I know it certainly is in my family. Sadly, they're separated from both sets of grandparents for my son. So, yeah, very special days there must have been for you. And were your grandparents Tauntonians as well?
My grandfather was Barnstable, and my grandmother, I've got to think about this, she might have been born, let me think, her father was an engine driver, so railway links again.
Yes.
And I don't remember, but I have been told, and I have photographs, that he was an engine driver in South Wales, and the general strike came along, and he broke it, and drove engines with, police on the engines and everything, and because of that, he was never able to work there again. His workmates would never work with him again.
Oh, what a shame.
Because he broke the strike. So that's when they came to Taunton. And I think he became an engine driver in Taunton, and they lived in Cyril Street West, overlooking the railway lines. And so my grandmother, I think I got a feeling she might have been either Plymouth or Somerset, but I can't remember. But she had a fair bit of Welsh in her, because at a critical time in her life she was in Pembroke, in Goodwick, I think. And hence the Welsh cakes and one thing and another.
I was wondering about that, yes.
Yes, so I think she was an interesting mixture, but I think fundamentally she was either Devon or Somerset.
But also you have this deep love of music that goes right back. That's possibly a Welsh Celtic bloodstream thing, perhaps?
Well, I don't really know, because we have to now look at my other grandparents. My father is a Manchester man.
Ah.
And his father had a chemist shop in Manchester. And they were very musical. My father's father, this is getting complicated. He would play piano duets with my mother, and my mother's mother, oh goodness, she played the piano as well. My father played the saxophone and played in the big dance bands of the 50s and in his own trios and quartets later on. My sister, when she grew up, played the trumpet and the cello.
Goodness.
So I've got a sneaking feeling
there's music through and through.
Music is there. But and my own side to music is my love of music, my interest in music. And the fact that later on in life I became a music critic. I've always been very passionate about my music. It means a lot to me. And it gives me great pleasure to share what I know. So yeah, music is most definitely there, with no question at all.
Can I ask, do you know what your first memories of music are? Your first feelings of a passion towards music and how that developed?
Oh, heck.
Was it listening perhaps in the living room to, I won't say a gramophone, not quite that bad, a record? Do you have any memories of music growing up?
Do you know, I can't think of any single incident, because we were brought up in an atmosphere of it.
Yeah.
With my grandparents and everybody playing piano duets, Dad in a dance band. It was just something.
Just part of life.
It was something that was there.
Yeah.
And we didn't really think about it.
But it's something you enjoyed. You didn't go, oh no, here we go, up to the old grandparents and the dreaded music again. It was something you enjoyed, or was it?
Now, for those of you who realise this is radio, and I think at that point I probably made a slight face, but I think the music I loved. Our grandparents are very different. My mum's grandparents were very free and easy, and there was no, rigid structure. My father's grandparents, if you went up there on a Sunday, you knew what you were going to eat, you knew what you were going to do, you knew exactly what was going to happen. And that was the difference between the two. And much as I loved my grandparents in Bridgewater, I did sometimes think, oh, we've got to be eating egg sandwiches again and this and that and all the rest of it. Very uncharitable of me. But it was a very rigid fixture, every fortnight. And I enjoyed the music, I enjoyed a lot of things, but I think the rigidity of it was something that I didn't really enjoy sometimes. And I think that was it.
I think it's a generational thing, isn't it? Because I know growing up, even in my family, there's quite a tradition to have certain foods on certain days. I don't know if that's a kind of post-war attitude of, having been on rations, having to be very organised in what you're cooking and perhaps falling into routines. I don't know if it comes from that. But,
it's tradition, isn't it?
It is.
The old fish on Friday thing.
Yes.
My grandparents did.
Yeah.
And that's been around for a long time.
Well, it's an old Christian tradition, isn't it, really?
Yes,
fasting
it is.
on Friday to abstain from meat. But, of course, fish today is quite a luxury, so it doesn't feel quite the same sacrifice as it perhaps once was.
I like fish. I really do.
Do you?
Yes. And I remember in my grandma's day, we used to have haddock.
Yeah.
And it was as bright yellow as I don't know what. So what they put on it to make it that bright yellow, I don't know, but it was delicious.
Yum.
Yes, I've always had a liking for food. But, as I say, going back to the general thing, I had a loving, caring upbringing. Because we weren't very well off, nearly everybody had a job. And Dad would work in the daytime. He did all manner of things. He used to drive a lorry at one stage to the Co-op Mineral Water Works in Bridgewater in the early mid-50s. And it was one of these lovely old things with a big starting handle on the front, delivering pop, effectively. And that was a wonderful thing. And we used to go out there, and he would do that in the daytime. He'd play in the dance band in the evening. A little later on in life, he and my mother would distribute an evening paper, print the late news in it and distribute it in Taunton. Mum's also worked in sweet shops. We all worked. I had a paper round. Everybody worked. It was just part of life. You didn't really think about it. And you didn't think about it in that, like the music.
Yes.
It was part of life.
And I think that's where you've got your work ethic from, because I know very few people who have the work ethic you do. It's remarkable how you cram it all in.
Yeah, but I don't really think about it.
Well, this is it, because it's always been there. It's been part of who you are, isn't it, your whole life? But
well, yeah, but if you're in a position where everybody has to work to keep ends meeting and one thing and another, you very naturally do it as soon as you can to contribute.
Yes.
Or eventually just stand on your own feet. So I did numerous jobs selling papers and one thing and another. And yes, I'm losing my thread a bit.
Well, I was going to pick up on that. So we're looking, obviously, where you are right now is as a professional. You know, you've been working in the radio industry for a while, but it didn't start off like that. What did you want to do at school? And I believe you went to, let me have a look at my little notes here. Was it...
hang on, I'm going to take you further back.
You can take me further back?
I'm going to take,
okay.
I'm going to take you further back than that. Now, where does the radio bug come from? Well, I definitely had it, and it was something which intrigued me from quite an early age. And I remember when I did my paper rounds, when I was sort of 10, 11, 12, I'd go out in the morning with my paper bike basket on the front full of papers. And if it happened to be rubbish day, I'd pick the radios off the bins and bring them home. And try, with varying degrees of success and alarming failure, to fix them, involving fairly small explosions, well, not that small sometimes, and one thing and another. Occasionally I got one working. I remember one occasion when there was a component in one called an electrolytic capacitor. These things are always a bit touchy with age. Turned it on, the whole thing exploded, and there was a circular mark on the ceiling. about 5 inches across.
Your poor parents.
And I can't remember how well, they would have guessed. But I was, I suppose, slightly unconventional in many ways. But radio had always been something which had fascinated me. And it was there quite early.
So the technical side of it, not just, you know, listening to it and the creative artistic side, but actually the technical side was something that was very much of interest to you.
Initially the technical side, yes. I always wanted to know how things worked. I was a terror. I'd take light switches apart and all manner of other... I was lethal, and all manner of other things to see how they worked. And didn't always put them back together again either. And... I mean, as a learning process, it was amazing. But I must have put myself at risk quite a number of times. And these days are so health and safety conscious, I couldn't imagine some of the things I did. But I learnt. And by this time, we'd moved to Priorswood, Blackdown Road. Just been built, I think about 1958. And I was just about, I think I had 2 years at Wellsprings. I'd been at Holy Trinity School before then. 2 years at Wellsprings, and then I went on to Hewish's Grammar School, the old Hewish's, which is now where Sainsbury's is in Taunton. It was a Dickensian, Victorian establishment of high quality, but very, very old-fashioned in every aspect. Everybody wore gowns and mortarboards, and but it was what I needed. I've never been academically good. I scraped it, I got into there. But I needed... We were talking about rigid structures earlier. But that was one case where I needed a rigid structure in order to learn. And so, despite the fact that today it would look absolutely antediluvian, personally, I was grateful. Because it meant that I had to do what I had to do.
Yes.
And that was good.
Not too many beatings, I hope.
Oh, no. We didn't have... We had canings.
Yes.
Not beatings. No. Beatings go back a bit further than that. But canings, you would go into the headmaster's office and put your hand on the desk. And he would get your hand. I think...
We had canings when I was at school. So, yes, it went on for quite a while before it was stopped, wasn't it?
Goodness, I would never have thought that. But I mean, it was a very good school. My last year at Richard Hewish was in what I now laughingly call the new building on South Road, which is now 50 years old. And I have to keep remembering this. and so, yes, so we reached the glorious age of 16. I was never a rebellious teenager. I was happy at home. I saw no reason to jump up and down and break the mold. Pardon me. And I had the smoothest possible transition from being an ordinary teenager at home to being an older teenager moving out into the world doing different things. It really was a very smooth transition. And it can only be because my parents were very understanding, very open-minded, and were always there. I have no doubt that I shook them up once or twice. I mean, I've always been a very keen motorcyclist. I love motorbikes. And I remember the look on my mum's face when I brought the first proper one home, you know. I bought a moped when I was 15, and on the 5 o'clock in the morning of my 16th birthday, I was driving round Priorswood on this moped, which I'd polished for 6 months. But it wasn't long before I got a proper motorbike. And at college, I was by that time at Taunton Technical College, which of course is now Somerset College, and studying electrical engineering. And those were the days, I loved them, when you could buy a bike for 10 quid. And everybody at college would buy and sell bikes on a very regular basis. And so I had, 20 different bikes.
Gosh.
In 2 years. Everything from great big 600cc sidecar outfits down to other little ones, everything.
And let me guess, you didn't leave those alone either. A bit of tinkering had to go on, I suspect.
Oh, yes, because obviously there's other people there who were interested in bikes. And we got together and thought, what can we do with this one, you know? And a friend of mine, in fact, was called Tim Stiles. He was wonderful. He could get hold of a bike that did 30 and make it do 60. He was amazing. And in fact, later on in life, he did in fact become a racing car tuner.
I was wondering if
as
that
part of
maybe.
his life. Although he was a teacher, mainly as a career, but he opened a business in Bridgewater, tuning cars.
Fabulous.
You know, getting them in a high state of tune. But he had that again from it was just there. And I shall never ever forget. He said, "Do you want to come for a ride in my Mini?" Well, common sense should have told me what I was due for, and that his car would go faster than anybody else's. And I remember driving down the riverside at Seaton, Long Straight Road, and when we got to the corner at Axmouth, he was doing 120.
Oh my goodness.
But being Tim, being a brilliant driver and knowing exactly what he was doing, we were all right, no problem. But it, no, the phrase that came to my mind I can't say on the radio, but I was, shall we say, mildly bothered. So life was not dull, and I had my independence. I had the excitement of motorcycling. And so we're now at the end of my college years, which I got an ordinary national diploma in mechanical and electrical engineering. I didn't stay until sixth form school. I wasn't clever enough.
I'm sure you were.
And I'm a practical person.
Yeah.
And
which is still clever. I wish people wouldn't put themselves down like that. You know, I used to work with young people in schools, and so often it would be a case of, they're not fit for academics, and they're sort of put into a subcategory of humanity. But not at all. It's an incredibly skilled and intelligent area. It's just different, isn't it?
I think the unusual thing about me is that I've got a very wide range of skills in many directions. I don't specialise in one thing. I can turn my hand to most things. But of course, well, as we found out later on in life, I've got the artistic side as well. And this is a weird combination.
Yes.
So here we are. We're hovering on the brink of the swimming pool of life at the end of getting my qualifications at Taunton Tech. What do you think I do?
What do you do at the end of Taunton Tech? I don't know. In this day and age, I'd have gone off for a gap year, but that probably wasn't an option back then, so I don't really know.
Don't be silly. That's only for people with money.
Exactly.
No.
Do tell.
I had job offers from a number of companies, but the first one that came along was from the South Western Electricity Board as a student engineer. And not knowing where the next one was coming from, you say, right, we'll have that. And I had 4 years with the Electricity Board. They put me through college for a higher national certificate, which I failed.
Oh dear.
Twice.
Oh gosh.
In, it's even more hilarious, electronics.
Not specifically radio electronics.
Electronics. And
Had it been how to blow up a radio, you'd have got an A, wouldn't you?
no, it was. I thought it was ironic, given what happened later on in life.
Yeah, definitely.
However, that failure was one of the best things that could have happened to me, because I had to look around, and I noticed that the BBC were advertising for engineers. I thought, I'm a radio person. I'm interested. I fancy that job. Put in for it, got it. And the next thing I knew, I was at their training course.
This is in 1970, I believe, bringing us through the timeline.
1970, over at Wood Norton in Evesham, where we had a great time. You can imagine what a training school full of teenage engineers does in its spare time. Things like putting minis in the toilet, lecturers' boats on the roof. We were moderately reasonable. So I learnt how to become a high-power transmitter engineer, which is looking after the big power transmitters that go off all the way around the world on the world service.
Our nearest one is, was it at the time where Trop Aquaria is?
That's the medium. That's the medium wave one.
Is that different?
Yeah, that's for us. That actually broadcast Radio Wales at the time, but that's a British regional station. No, there's the overseas stations, and I'm bound to miss one. We're at Wooferton, which is near Leominster, Penrith, Skelton. I went up there. Rampisham near Dorset. Up on the hills is a big station with lots of masts. That's a shadow of its former self. And I think there were two others, which I've completely forgotten the name of here. That's what a microphone does for you, isn't it? And so I went round the shortwave stations, gaining experience, doing intermediate courses, and became a transmitter engineer, which was frequently boring, but often manically interesting if things happened. It was a good job, it was well paid, and I was able to move myself across into independent life because of it. And I enjoyed it. It was something a little bit special. Then came the time when they were short of engineers on the British medium wave and long wave stations. And so I went off to Brooklands Park in London. I went up to Westerglen in Scotland. But I did tell them I only got there if I could come back to Washford. Nobody wanted to go to Westerglen. I went to Washford. And Washford was where I spent my last couple of years as a transmitter engineer. I lived in Stigumber, had a very happy time. Built a vintage car, built a vintage bike.
As you do.
As you do, yes. And I had a great time. And I couldn't see any reason to change it. But, that's right. Hang on, I'm just going to have a slurp of coffee. If you'd
yes,
like,
indeed.
If you would like to fill in the odd 30 seconds.
Yes, indeed. Well, yeah, I'm very interested to know how all this turned into the career that you have now, which we're going to be finding out. And also coming up, there's some interesting stories coming up, I believe, about a time that you went travelling, and particularly to the Southern American areas of the continent, of the world, and all that happened there. And I'm interested to know if that is where the transition happened from engineer to actual broadcaster.
Aha. No. The transition was on its way before then. Now, I mentioned that I didn't see why I should change from a transmitter engineer. But I saw a job application looking for engineers for local radio, for the BBC. And this combined my engineering instincts with my creative instincts. And I thought, oh, yeah, I want to do that. Now, it was an unwritten law. Engineers didn't go.
You don't cross the line.
You don't cross the line.
Yeah,
It's just not done. But I had absolutely nothing to lose. Applied for the job, got an interview. They had no idea I could do the job. I was trained with transmitters. And I just sat there, looked them full in the face and said, look, you don't know that I can do this. I do. Trust me.
Wow.
I want that job. And I think they had a discussion saying, well, this chap's a bit interesting. You know, he's not normal. Well, I know that.
We all know that.
So we'll give him a try. We'll give him a chance. And I had 2 years, one of the happiest 2 years of my life, with BBC Radio Carlisle. That was the only place there was a job going.
Gosh.
I had a wonderful time.
And you must have been, I mean, I'm assuming obviously you sounded full of confidence, but it must have been pretty terrifying to start out with.
No.
Having had, that first broadcast was just a joy.
I know, hang on a minute. Remember when I went up as an engineer?
Yeah, as an engineer, of course.
But on a local radio station.
Yes.
Well, even so I was doing studio engineering then.
Yes.
Completely different, but I knew I could do it.
Yeah.
And you get drawn into things. They want a voice for something. They're doing something different. They're looking for something interesting. And they'll say, oh, yeah, can you stand in and do this or do that or do the other? And that was the beginning
I see, okay.
of the broadcast side. Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful. You'd go out recording programmes and all manner of things. And I had a great time. I had my own house because it was a good job. And I had a lovely lady called Rosemary, who I bumped into on the station, and we spent many a happy day together. And she was interested in things like Celtic history and one thing and another. And there were so many places you could go to look at things and one thing and another. And I think she was a bit special. And well, I mentioned that I was at Radio Carlisle.
You did, and that must have been 70...
76, 78.
Something like that, yeah.
And I was having a wonderful time. And everything, I mean, I couldn't have had a nicer life. Well, a friend of mine called Rob Levy, who was also on my transmitter training course all those years ago, always sent me a Christmas card. And about 4 years before, he'd gone off to Latin America to work with the Guatemalan, this is Central America, just south of Mexico, to work with the Guatemalan Federation of Radio Schools as a consultant engineer. And it was a voluntary service overseas job. It didn't work for him, so he came back after a year with a Chilean wife, as is one of the high risk. Yeah, it's one of the high risk things that most people come back with somebody. And I got a Christmas card in 78. No, it would be 77, saying, greetings from Switzerland. He was a translator by now, and he said, "Job's still open in Guatemala. What about it?" Because I'd considered it. And I looked at it and I laughed. And I said, "You've got to be joking. You know, I'm happy.
Yes.
In a job I love. I've got my own house. I'm happy." Anyhow, over the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I cannot explain this, a little voice in my head said, "You're going to do that job." And I said, "Oh, don't be stupid. Don't be daft." And the little voice said, "You're going to do that job." And I thought, well, this is balmy. Absolutely balmy. And after about a month of this, I thought, I don't know why that's there, but maybe I am. And I handed in my notice.
Gracious.
With Radio Carlisle. They were wonderful to me. They gave me music festivals and all manner of other things to do. In my last 3 months, they were brilliant. And I sold my house. And come August, I was set. As I said, this was a VSO job. I'd gone up for pre-job training in London with CIR, the Catholic Institute for International Relations, and so because I knew what the political situation was out there and where we fitted into everything else, and it was one of the most violent countries in the world. And I was sat on a suitcase, August, in my parents' house in Seaton, waiting for an aeroplane. Mind you, it didn't arrive at Seaton, so I had to go to London for it. And that was the first time I'd ever flown. I went to Miami, then I went to Guatemala, and then began the next 2 years of my life, which was remarkable in many, many ways.
pivotal, perhaps, in your life.
And well, looking back on it now, I can't imagine how I did it. And of course, I got to Guatemala. The Federation of Radio Schools was 6 radio stations. What they wanted was an engineer come general dog's body for each station to do with what they wanted. You know, they decided their own priorities and said, right, we've got you for 4 months, let's do this. And it ranged from completely rebuilding the stations, and I had the chance to design one from the ground up, which is remarkable, to doing whatever they wanted, basically. Maybe just training staff, maybe doing, it was interesting.
So if I could interrupt you, what was the background at the time when you arrived? Obviously there was, political regimes going on. The radio network, had it existed prior to that? Had it been destroyed and it was your job to go in and build it back up again?
No. It existed.
It existed.
And it was broadcasting.
Yeah.
But it was in a very, very, very poor state. And you look around here now and you see what we're using.
Yes.
They were using ancient domestic equipment. In many cases, there were stations that were the exception. No, not many. What we have here is 100 times, better than what they had.
And that's saying something.
Oh no!
I joke. We do very well.
No. What we've got here is absolutely brilliant.
It's fabulous.
And therefore, every 4 months I had a new challenge. And don't forget, I had to do it all in Spanish.
Goodness.
Therefore, I arrived in Guatemala with no Spanish. I had an 8-week course, 1 teacher, 1 pupil, change of teacher every week.
Oh my goodness me.
My digs, nobody spoke English. My teachers wouldn't speak English from day 1. And that was a tough call. But once again, I found I had the aptitude for it. Language is like music.
Yes.
And Spanish is very musical.
Yes, indeed.
And I also had the best possible motivation for it. And after 8 weeks, I was out working.
Incredible.
Not to say that I was fluent, but I could manage. I think I became really fluent after about a year. And yes, the political background, the country had extreme right-wing governments for many years. They'd had a foray to the left in the 50s, and then the military coups after that. And in the 10 years before I went, I think the government death squads had killed 20,000.
Gosh.
And it was a background of violence. There were groups operating against the government within the country. There were... You pick the newspapers of every day, there were half a dozen people being found dead, bombs under buses, all manner of things. And the thing is, you think, well, how can you work in that? And the only way you can work in that, and it's not easy, say, right, this isn't England. You've got to look at the country. You've got to look at what the actual status quo is. You don't have to accept it. But you have to say, right, this is what life is out here, and then you can work.
And also, I should imagine that, what you were doing was incredibly valuable and important in, you may feel powerless in an environment like that and all that's going on around you. But the media, communication, broadcasting, so powerful, so important. Who knows what part that had to play in the change in history out there? So that must have been a huge motivator.
Think on this. You're in a country with a literacy rate of, I would have thought, 70%. If you empower people with literacy, you make them aware. If you make them aware, you make them a threat to the government. And therefore, what we were doing, which would look perfectly ordinary here, was looked at over the shoulder as a possible threat.
Yes.
And we worked on the limits of what we could do over there. So, yes, I was well aware of this. I knew what I was going into. I'm not going to go into any great details about some of the amazing things that happened out there. I think I was very aware. I couldn't have done the job if I hadn't been in sympathy with what I was doing and how it was being done. Couldn't have done it.
No.
And it wouldn't have been fair to send somebody out that didn't have the knowledge.
I think it's fair to say it's what they call a vocation, that calling, that sense of having to go and do something. You know, on whatever level you might interpret that, but definitely there was a sense within it you needed to go and do something. It's interesting, isn't it, how you ended up doing something so significant and so powerful to the people around you as well as within your own
I still, to this day, cannot tell you what that motivation was to go.
Yes.
I just knew that something was there.
You had to go and you had to be there.
And the little voice said, "You're going to do that." Can't tell you why.
Incredible courage, I have to say. I mean,
Well, don't start putting labels on things. It didn't feel like it. It wasn't like that.
No.
It was a natural progression. It wasn't courage. It seemed the thing to do. And you might think I was a bit brave, but by God, the people I work with, they were at the very sharp end. In fact, after I came back, one of my best friends, who was in charge of one of the stations, was shot in front of his family. That's where we were.
I know, I remember you telling me about that.
Yeah.
It's horrendous. And that was the reality you were living in, and that's why you may not accept or in your humility accept courage, but my goodness, to live knowing that is an absolute reality.
Oh yeah, the people put their life on the line every day.
Yeah.
I could always come home. So don't get the impression that I was courageous or brave. It's not like that at all. And it just felt like a normal life.
Yes. Yeah.
And also don't get the impression that every day was tinged with disaster and all
No,
that.
I'm sure there must be moments of normality.
Because 90% of it, if you work sensibly and carried on normally, were normal.
So what did you actually do while you were there? Was this a time when you were engineering, or was this when you started to transition more into actual broadcasting?
No, this is mainly engineering.
This is mainly engineering.
I think I only broadcast once.
Yeah.
Probably made a complete idiot of myself.
In your pidgin Spanish. But no, you were fluent after a year, so you'd have probably been very impressed.
Well, after a year, I knew somebody came up to me and said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I think you're Argentinian." And I thought, I've done it.
Yay.
I've made it, because he sensed the European
Yes.
and the Spanish mixture.
Yes, very good.
And I thought, right, we're there. But no, the key point is when you think in it. When you're not translating into English and then into Spanish. You're thinking in it.
And do you still remember Spanish? Can you still speak Spanish?
It's all inside me. And it takes a little bit of drawing out, but it's all there.
It's all there.
Yeah, I can do it. Even though I haven't used it for years. Do you know, there's so much more to think about and talk about. Somehow or other, we've almost used up our hour on the...
I know. Barely halfway through your story.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to attempt to condense the rest of the story into about 2 minutes, I think. I don't think that's possible.
No.
I can think of a radio show where it might be. But
Not the Reduced Shakespeare Company, but...
No, without hesitation.
Yeah.
One thing and another. So just a minute, I think. I believe so.
But no, because we want to know, obviously, there's so much, from this moment onwards, and when you returned to the UK, there's so much to tell about what happened there.
I mean, in an absolute nutshell, I came back from Guatemala in 1980. Didn't know what to do. Thought about rejoining the BBC and didn't. Started my own business, which carried on until I became ill in 2012. In the meantime, I did commercial radio presenting. I got involved with community radio again in England with 10 Radio, and of course here with Hospital Radio and Apple FM. And the rest, as they say, is history. And I don't think we can go into any of that because we've run out of time. So
Well, thank you, Philip, for that. I'm sure everyone listening, we hear your voice so frequently here, and you're so fantastic at what you do. And it's lovely to know a little bit more about the man behind the microphone, or behind the radio if you're listening at home. This wonderful man called Philip, who I hope we will hear more about.
Steady on. I'm a very ordinary person.
Very self-deprecating.
Do you know, I forgot the most important thing in my life? I married.
Yes.
In 1988, when I was 40. And my wife was 41. I inherited 2 lovely stepdaughters of 14 and 17. And we have 2 of our own daughters of 26 and 24. Now, if that isn't a blessing, I don't know what is.
Indeed.
So, it's been a good life. And on that note, I think we better wind it up.